I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. Irving Blum, sitting in the middle. He's a living legend, both as a collector and gallerist during the post-war years on the West Coast.
Barely living.
He is, of course, best known as the co-director and co-founder of Ferus Gallery in Los Angeles, which he took over in 1958. The gallery mounted numerous shows until it closed in 1966 and was the first to show artists such as Robert Irwin, Wallace Berman, Ed Moses, Larry Bell, and Ed Ruscha, among many, many others. However, it was in 1962 that Ferus took its most now historic chance by doing a show with an unknown artist named Andy Warhol and showed his Campbell soup cans. The show, which was a first for Warhol, flopped in terms of sales, and at the time, each piece was selling for $100. Very few were sold. And well, the rest is history, as they are now, only decades later, part of the Museum of Modern Art's permanent collection. Sitting next to him is another figure in the art world who needs very little introduction, Mr. Jeffrey Deitch. Prior to his recent appointment as director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, Mr. Deitch was a dealer in modern and contemporary art and art advisor to private art collections. He has worked for Citibank, the John Weber Gallery, and the D. Cordova Museum in Lincoln, Massachusetts. Mr. Deitch also holds an MBA from Harvard Business School. As a curator, one of his best-known...
He's now in charge of investigating the oil spill.
We're in trouble now. As a curator, one of his best-known exhibitions is Posthuman, done in 1992, which included now very iconic works by Charles Ray, Martin Kippenberger, Felix Gonzalez Torres, Mike Kelly, Matthew Barney, and Damien Hirst, among other artists. If that's not enough, he's also a prolific writer, and in 1996 opened Deitch Projects, a gallery which has produced more than 200 projects by contemporary artists. Moderating our panel is Peter Plagens, a writer, artist, and cultural critic who has written extensively for Newsweek and several publications over the last 30 years. He's the author of 2 books and has received fellowships from the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, the NEA, and the National Arts Journalism Program.
Whoa.
He has also shown extensively as an artist and has taught at New York University, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and UC Berkeley. He lives in New York City. Please help me welcome our panel.
I have a little cheat sheet here, but it's some questions in case things...
I have one too.
You do? The New York Times. But if the conversation flows, as I hope it will, and the back and forth, I will just duck and get out of the way. I thought, though, that we might start with a little comment. We recently lost a great personage in the LA art world, Dennis Hopper.
Yes.
And Dennis Hopper was a patron and a habitué of the Ferus Gallery. Dennis Hopper was also a fine photographer, and I believe the subject of your first exhibition at MOCA.
Right.
So I thought if you'd want to say a word or two about Dennis,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just as a kind of a tribute before we start.
Yeah, well, I think, there's a show at MOCA that Jeffrey's doing. Jeffrey could begin this, and I have 1 or 2 words to add about Dennis.
I thought that we rushed to do an exhibition with Dennis Hopper, which opens July 10th. It's my first project at MOCA. We knew that Dennis was ailing and wanted him to be able to be involved. And it's fortunate that Dennis was completely involved in the selection of works, the installation of the show, and he was very happy to know that he was getting his first museum retrospective in his home city. Dennis is a figure who spanned many media and expanded the idea of what an artist can be. An artist can be a filmmaker, even an actor, and certainly a personality. And Dennis was part of this extraordinary community, in which Irving was one of the central figures in Los Angeles in the early 1960s. And I believe Dennis was one of the 3 people who bought one of the soup can paintings, right, Irving?
Correct.
That he then returned to you. Maybe you could, because that's such a central story, should we talk about the whole Andy Warhol 32 Soup Cans exhibition.
Sure, we can
which is
do
just,
that.
It's one of the great
I think
stories
people-
in contemporary art history.
People may be interested. I had this little gallery in California called Ferus, and I represented artists from LA. And I wanted to increase my scope vis-a-vis the artists I showed. My problem was that I had very little money. I would go to New York painfully once a year, and I'd refer to 2 or 3 people. Henry Geldzella, before he became Henry Geldzella, Bill Seitz, and a young man called Richard Bellamy, who had a gallery called the Green Gallery. I thought it was one of the greatest galleries in New York, apart from Leo and 1 or 2 others. I liked his sensibility. And they, the one thing that these 3 people had in common is they went to studios. And when I got to New York, I'd call all 3 of them, and I'd get their studio lists, the lists of people they'd visited that they thought were promising. And on one list, Andy's name appeared on one such event. Andy's name appeared on 2 lists, rather. And so I called Andy, and I went to see him. This was in 1961. He lived in a little house on Lexington Avenue. And there were these big cartoon paintings. He said, "Oh, I'm glad you came." He said, "These just came back." I said, "Came back from where?" They were on display in the window of a department store called Bonwit Teller. And they'd been there for a month, and they were just returned. Now, in 1960, 61, you have to project yourself back and think what I was confronting. I was weaned on first-generation American painting. For me, my heroes then and still were Pollock, Newman, Rothko, de Kooning, Klein, etc. These people were nothing less than heroes, occupied in America the dominant place, whether anybody knew it or not. I knew it. I was absolutely certain of it. And here I am looking at unfinished cartoons. Made no connection. But I liked him. He was available, charming, interested, curious, and we talked. And at the end of an hour, I thanked him and then left. And kind of put it out of my mind, but kept thinking about the person. I had occasion to come back to New York 6 months later. A collector offered me a ride. He said to me, "Irving," he said, "do you know anything about Giacometti?" I said, "Everything there is to know." Total lie. I still don't know a lot about Giacometti. I like to look at them. So in any case, back to New York, and I go to Leo's. Leo was a touchstone for me. I learned a great deal from Mr. Castelli. And I went to visit him. I really adored him. And he was busy with a client, and Ivan Carr, he had a young assistant, sitting there in the front of the gallery, and Ivan said to me, "Here, look at these," and I look and I see cartoons. And I say, Andy Warhol. Remember, there was no such thing as pop. The style wasn't talked about. It wasn't heralded. It was underground and incredibly private. I said, Andy Warhol, and Ivan said, "No, some guy living in Jersey, his name is Lichtenstein." I thought, there's something going on. You didn't have to be a genius to realize that there was something else. I looked hard at these Lichtenstein paintings, and something clicked. In my mind, it had to have been, because, as I say, I had no reference, it had to have been a Leger, the black outline. So they were more familiar to me than Andy's cartoons. And I said to Ivan, "What are you going to do about this guy?" He said, "Well, we're thinking about showing him." And I said, I want to show them in California. I said, okay, can you organize it? Yes. I said, I have to run now. I ran out of the Castelli Gallery, and I went to see Andy. I called him. He said, come over. I went to see him. I walk in. There are 2 or 3 soup cans. What are these? He says, I'm painting soup cans. He says, I'm going to do 32. And I said, why 32? It's an odd number. He said, 32 because there are 32 varieties. Chili beef, tomato, vegetable. He said, he said, in 10 years, there'll be 50 varieties. But for the moment, there are 32, and that's what I'm doing. And another bell went off. I thought, I hope I know what I'm doing. You know, no assurances, nothing you can refer to. You're out there just hanging in space. Would you like to show them in California? Well, he stopped. He was thinking, I made them in New York. My friends live in New York. And so I took his arm and I said, Andy, I said, movie stars come into the gallery. I knew he was a little starstruck. And he said, let's do it. And the truth was, movie stars never came into the gallery. The only movie star that ever came, there were 2. Hedy Lamarr came into the gallery, saw 2 Guston watercolors that I painfully bought from Philip in New York through a friend. I thought they were brilliant. I was thinking about keeping them. I really adored them. She said, who are those? I said, artist called Philip Guston, first generation painter, really, really poetic, really sensitive, really worth looking at. I love them. I said, well. She said, take him out to the car. I took him out to the car. She drives off, big Cadillac. I never see her again. She doesn't pay a nickel for the 2 water. So, I'm off movie stars. Movie stars walk into the gallery, I leave.
Can I just interrupt? You know, Hedy Lamarr, many years later, was arrested for shoplifting in Florida.
See? Movie stars. However, the second movie star, he wasn't a movie star yet. This was 1962, but on his way to being one was Dennis. And Dennis came in, and Dennis had, above all, an astonishing intuition. Where did it come from? I mean, hard to really analyze. However, I showed him the Liechtenstein transparencies, and he looked at them and he said, wow. And the next day, he pulled up to the gallery, and he came in and he said, we're going for a ride. I said, fine. I hopped in his car, and we drove down to a company in Los Angeles called Foster and Kleiser. They make billboards, and they sold flattened out, folded, big billboards. I mean, if you were crazy enough to want to buy one. They were made to be seen in outdoor frames. Dennis bought 2 or 3 billboards, went home, and I watched him as he began cutting them up, and in his daughter's room, a giant wall-size cheeseburger. He got the sensibility. Nearly lost his wife in the process, but he got the sensibility. And I've never forgotten that moment. I think to this day that it was astonishing, and Dennis astonished in odd ways.
I'm going to probably take this down a notch too much, but it does connect in, and I'd like to bring Jeffrey in on this. When the Ferus Gallery was operative, and when you were operative in LA from 1958 to the early 70s.
57 to 73.
57 to 73, about right. LA was a town, and I'm from Los Angeles. Not a native, as nobody was in those days, but I went to college in Los Angeles, and I think the month that I graduated, I walked into your gallery and saw that Andy Warhol show. But when I was there and I was an art student, it was a city that didn't really have any art history.
Correct.
It had a history. We had our abstract expressionists, we had our cubists, we had a little burst of geometric abstraction with the four abstract classicists, but it really didn't have any history. The Ferus Gallery made one of the sort of, what do you call them, the cornerstones? Yeah, the cornerstones of a modern art history or a contemporary art history in Los Angeles by showing Billy and Robert Irwin and all those people.
Craig Kaufman.
And Craig Kaufman and the whole... that
John Altoon.
You can name...
John
name
Altoon. Yeah.
John Altoon.
Yeah.
And since then, Los Angeles, because of that, a Springboard has had a whole lot of history that includes, a kind of, Paul McCarthy, Mike Kelly sensibility. It was the home, really, for the whole beginning of what was called then the women's movement. There's been a whole lot of stuff and a whole lot of sensibility. Now, LA it's a city that has a modern art history or a contemporary art history. Does this now make a difference in what it's like to operate there in a cultural sense? And I throw this over to Jeffrey. You're coming as a museum director, the MOCA, with a city that really now does have a modern art history. Does that prompt anything for me?
Yeah.
Well, something always prompts something for me.
Oh, so
yeah.
something always prompts something. Yeah, right. I think what you say is exactly right, and it has made a difference. But what occurs to me is that, I'm really much more about the past, Jeffrey much more about the future. And as I look back and as I think back, it was a small, intimate scene without a lot of people banging on the door. And these people worked for each other, these artists that I showed. And I have kind of a wonderful collector story, which I wanted to insert. Probably this is as good a time as any. I was sitting in my gallery. Mind you, no activity. You people don't understand what no activity means. I mean, you're pushed and jostled and knocked down next door. That never existed. It didn't exist. There weren't that many people involved. There simply weren't. You dealt with what you dealt with. I'm sitting in my gallery, barely looking out the front window. No business. Hadn't had business for a month. A month. Nobody walked in. Big limousine pulls up in front of the gallery, and I look at it. Little guy jumps out. I recognize him from art magazines. Joe Hirshhorn. He's about that size. Jumps into the gallery. He said, "Who are these guys?" I said, Billy Al Bankston, Craig Kaufman, John Altoon, Robert Irwin, Ed Ruscha, on and on and on. Who are they? Well, they're from here. They're from the West Coast. Oh, they seem serious. Mr. Hirshhorn, they're incredibly serious. Tell me more about them. I do. Give me a price. I give him a price. He says, knock off a third. I say, Mr. Hirshhorn, let me tell you, this gallery is like a cooperative. He said, I don't know what you mean. I said, I meet every 4 to 6 weeks with the artist. They dictate policy to me. You see this scene? The scene you're standing in? The gallery you're standing in? It's like a family. Like a family. We don't do a lot of business. We support each other. We value each other. And we listen to each other's opinions. He said, wow. He said, I love that. He turned around, in his car, gone. One year later, sitting in the gallery, big limousine, little guy jumps out. Joe Hirshhorn comes in the gallery. What is this? It's a painting by Edward. The whole show deals with the LA County Museum on fire. Big, mural-sized painting. LA County Museum on fire. He said, I was to the LA County Museum 2 days ago. He said it wasn't on fire. So I explained that it's a metaphor. I don't think he understood what that meant. But he liked the painting. He says, I like the show. He says, give me a price on everything. I say, absolutely. So I add up the prices of all the, various pictures. I add a third. He says, without batting an eye, knock off a third. I say, with great pleasure. One spurt. He buys the whole show. The painting rests now in Washington at the Hirshhorn, so when you confront it, remember the story.
I wrote down a little phrase when I was coming in here, and then I crossed it out, that in LA, it's Irving's history, we just live in it. I want to throw it over to Jeffrey. What is it like now? Any feelings about coming to Los Angeles, coming to that museum, and whatever modern and contemporary art history has, even though, as Irving says, you are the future?
Well, we said in the back room there, in Los Angeles, it's always the future. That's what's so exciting about it. So this community that Irving describes still exists, and a few of the artists have passed away recently, but most of them are still around. They're still friends. It's remarkable.
Yeah.
We see them all the time. And so this has spawned a remarkable community. These artists didn't withdraw. They're very present. Some of them are involved in teaching, but they're all involved in nurturing other artists, younger generations. So now we have a gigantic art audience in Los Angeles. It's a different art audience than the audience here or in New York. It's not, New York has a large professional audience of the 100,000 people who make their living writing about art, dealing in art. It's not the case in Los Angeles. It's a very large, creative crossover audience. So it's a special new challenge. There's many people who are involved in music, film, and they see art as an extension of their creative world. So it's a different kind of programming that a museum needs to institute there in Los Angeles to embrace this new, larger community. And that's one of the reasons why we started with Dennis Hopper.
In my time, also, there was always a kind of resistance in LA towards giving. They weren't extraordinarily generous. And I think that aspect is beginning to change, finally, after many, many, many years. And I thought about it, and I think probably that attitude existed because the people there come from other places largely. They come from Cleveland, they come from Chicago, they come from Akron, and that's where they give money. But somehow LA wasn't really the recipient.
Yeah, there used to be in my day, there were about 4 or 5 collectors.
Yeah.
And that was about it. Another little semi-historical thing. In your day, maybe a little later, into the mid-'60s and the '70s, there used to be a lot of talk about, I'm going to stop that, I want to interject something just that I just thought of. Because Irving said you have to project yourself back. It was a different kind of time. And I also think there was a different kind of attitude in the Ferus heyday. Billy Bankston famously said, and I think it was in print sometime, that the time had come to wash our hands, to put on a pair of clean trousers, and to get rid of that San Francisco sensibility and start being artists. And what he meant by San Francisco sensibility was abstract expressionism.
Correct.
Because you had the Clifford Still kind of heritage from up there.
Right.
And Billy was one of the first, and it was a kind of an attitude, I think, that spread across Ferus, that an artist was a professional, and there was no reason to go through all this sort of, cold water, flat, angst and stuff like that. You did your work. And my little Billy story is one of those things where he made, I came into, and this was in about 1970, and there was a gallery called Rico Mizuna.
Oh.
And Rico had a little gallery in the back, a very good gallery, and there was a driveway off La Cienega, and you walked in it. Well, Billy, who always had an interesting car, had a big Cadillac, big bronze Cadillac. And I was coming into the gallery one day, and there was about, 8 inches on either side of the car, so I was squeezing around the Cadillac, trying not to scratch it with my belt buckle, one of those big 70s belt buckles. And Billy appeared in the doorway. So as I'm trying to get out there, I just, at a loss for something to say to him, I said, this is a nice car. You keep it up really well. It was a kind of vintage Cadillac, and Billy looked over at me and he said, they have men who do that sort of thing. Back to our regularly scheduled...
Oh, I must tell one
Okay.
world-class Rico Mizuna. Rico was a Japanese lady, a legend in Los Angeles for 2 reasons. 1, she loved art. 2, she couldn't speak English. Lived there for 30 or 40 years, spoke Japan English, whatever that is. So I was in her gallery downtown for a short time. She moved downtown, talking to Ed Moses, sitting on a sofa, and Rico standing in the corner. And Bob Rowan, probably the most important collector in LA, lived in Pasadena, put an extraordinary collection together. Bob Rowan comes into the gallery, everybody looks up. Rico says, oh, Mr. Rowan, I have Billy Al Bankston to show you. And Bob says, oh, look, he says, I'm not interested in Billy Al Bankston. And Rico says, oh, I forget, you name fucker. I show you Barnett Newman.
Yeah.
May she live forever.
Rico was a little deceptive. I used to come into the gallery, and she may not have spoken a lot of English, but I used to come into the gallery, and she was reading Art Forum line by line by line.
Smart.
And we couldn't understand
No, we
Art
couldn't
Forum.
understand it. Well, Art Forum still reads as if it were translated from the German.
Anyway, what I was going to ask was, there was a moment in the sort of late 60s, 70s, when there was a lot of talk in LA about LA being very different from that sort of Euro-New York axis of New York, and that LA was on the Pacific Rim, and it was a whole different kind of sensibility as evidenced in the light and space work, the Irwin installations, people like Michael Asher, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is to both of you. Whatever happened to that? Is it still extant? Is it underground? Is it permeated? Because LA seems to have a kind of big, raucous, complicated, not so much purist in that visual, perceptual sense, art world that it used to have.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's because it's become a house with many families. You know, it's just so broad now. There are people doing so many different things. It's hard to simply pinpoint it and say, this is the dominant point of view. What do you think, Jeffrey?
Right, and Los Angeles is now attracting artists from all over the world.
Yeah.
Excellent European artists living there, artists who move from cities all around the United States, Asia. So it's an international art capital now.
Yes.
But that distinctive Los Angeles sensibility remains as a foundation. You know, both the light and space, and then...
For example, some of the best food you can get in California comes off the side of a taco truck. Now that's unique.
I'm going to go back to the serious sort of thing.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Is that light and space, that Pacific Rim, that sort of perceptual kind of thing, is it there anymore, and how is it there? What kind of? I mean, it's a house with many families in it, but the family of light and space and that sort of stuff. What does it look like now? What do the kids look like?
I don't really encounter it so much. I don't encounter it so much. Once Jim Terrell left, he took it with him. I mean, it could be happening, but it's in studios that I don't visit.
I think it's still there very much as a foundation. And you have
It's referred to.
sort of a middle generation, an artist like Charles Ray, who has absorbed all of that, but also the sensibility of movie sets and mannequins and that artificiality of the movie set. he's put the two together. And then another generation is basing their work on that combination. So it's still there in the roots.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm gonna see if I can segue that into a kind of show business thing, and this is mostly for Jeffrey, because one of the things where I got to know your gallery and went to a thing were a couple of Vanessa Beecroft performances, that memorable one on the USS Enterprise Museum, and you were, I don't know how many people, if it's been, you know, by that new program that came out on Bravo called, you know, Work of Art, the Next Great Artist. Jeffrey did a program, an art reality program long before that called Art Star. So what I'm going to ask is about LA, show business. You've been involved in that kind of thing, say those Vanessa Beecroft things. Are we in an era where art is a kind of form of show business? And it has kind of the sensibilities of show business, and does that play especially well in LA?
Well, during the era that Irving's been talking about, the time of Andy Warhol's soup can paintings, so an artist like Andy was getting tremendous stimulation from popular culture, using that as his subject matter. Now we've gotten to the point where artists are actually able to insert their sensibility into popular culture. So one of our first projects at Museum of Contemporary Art is an extraordinary project with James Franco, who's one of the most exciting young actors. So James Franco took a role on a very mainstream soap opera, General Hospital, and it's very, very middle brow, very different than Andy finding inspiration in B movies. And what we're doing is James had General Hospital write into the script that his character is getting a show at the Museum of Contemporary Art. And all of the sets, at great expense, are being moved to the plaza in front of MOCA's Pacific Design Center branch. And Thursday evening, next week, they're going to film 8 episodes back to back all night. And all the soap opera fans, the art audience, they can all come and watch. They'll be in it too. I've also been written into the script. And a month later, James Franco on General Hospital, doing a kind of performance art role, will be beamed into kitchens all over America. So it's fascinating, this new kind of interplay between art and popular culture. And that's one of the most interesting themes now, this ever more deliberately confusing mixture of one direction influencing the other.
Yeah, it has a kind of history. You know, we had 3 of those big-time New York artists, Julian Schnabel, who's been very good at directing films. They say, you know, the 3 of them, they seem to have gotten better.
He's a brilliant film director.
David Solly directed a film, which was, I don't think, great, but it was interesting to watch. Anybody who has Dennis Hopper, John Turturro, and Christopher Walken in the same movie has got a lot of guts.
It's some kind of maniac.
And Cindy Sherman did a movie called Office Killer, which very few people saw. And I don't think it's especially...
Let's not forget Bruce Conner.
Bruce Conner, who used films. But what I was going to say was I think it's true, it may not be true, that the woman who won the Academy Award for The Hurt Locker, Catherine Bigelow, used to be involved in art and language. You know?
Definitely. Yeah.
Anyway, well, I want to ask this then. Then is this you taking the helm of MOCA and you being the future, as Irving says, and we have this kind of, I don't want to call it a new model, but there's something out there about an interlacing of art and show business. Can this be a sea change in the way the museological part of the art world runs, in the same way that Thomas Krenz, when he took over the Guggenheim, did something that forever changed the nature of modern and contemporary art museums? Is it something that portentous?
I think in this, we're just following what artists are doing. We're following Damien Hirst, Takashi Murakami, younger people like James Franco. And that's what a contemporary art museum does. Sensitive to what the artists are experimenting with.
Jeffrey,
And providing a platform for that.
several people have asked me how you intend to handle your own collection in your new role.
Well,
You've been thinking about it, I'm sure.
Well, sure. Those of us who spent a lot of time as art dealers realize, as Irving does, that the business is actually always very tenuous, because in order to keep following the artists and serving them, you have to invest more and more. The ambitious artists, they want a larger space, they want a larger book, they want lots of production money. And so you're always running as fast as possible to keep up with that.
They want a 747.
And so there, you can't really, if you have an ambitious gallery that's handling ambitious artists, you actually can't keep that much cash for yourself. It all goes back in. The one thing you can do is to keep some of the art.
Right.
And
you have.
So that's what I've done, as Irving has done.
Yes.
And what I tried to do over my career is to keep something important by every artist who I had an important relationship with. So the collection is not just a regular collection, it's really very much a document of all the artists who I've been involved with. Yeah, so it's very personal.
Yeah.
So the last thing I want to do is sell the collection.
Right.
So basically the collection is kind of, it's one of my projects. And I want to try to keep it intact and maybe put it into a foundation.
I've rented a big space where you can show it.
Really? Seriously?
Just thinking about
it.
it.
Okay. No, but one of the things that I'm looking into in Los Angeles is how to handle the display of the collection, what to do with it. And hopefully it will be an interesting complement to what I do at the museum.
Very exciting.
But, and I have to address the 800-pound gorilla in the room, from time to time you will have to sell a work of art or two.
Maybe.
And it's a delicate question, and you've answered it before. Would you care to elaborate on it again about walking through that minefield or eggshells?
Well, first, I hope that I don't have to sell anything major. I prefer to keep it as a lifetime project. But I have to admit, if you've had a gallery, there are hundreds of pieces that just never sold, that are just lying around, that should sell some of them. And there are procedures that the Museum Association has. You offer the work first to the museum, and if they don't want it,
That's a
then you can
procedure.
sell it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't intend to do any sales that would conflict with the mission of the museum. I'm very aware of all the sensitivities.
And I think
Too
there's
bad. I was about to make you an offer on your jacket.
take off a third. There is one other aspect of that, and I think it should, which is a sensitivity to artists. If a dealer, we'll abstract it a little here, if a dealer changed occupations and had to, disperse the entire inventory all at once, you would do a terrible and irreparable disservice to a lot of artists, wouldn't you?
That's right. That's right.
I mean, the Dutch had that experience when they had to get rid of the art bank, all the works of art that the Dutch government had bought to support artists, and then they ran out of space. So what were they supposed to do with it? And if they sold it off all at once and just said, well, we're getting rid of it, there would be a lot of artists, and you know this, you're here at an art fair, it's a very delicate thing about supply and demand and releasing work and so forth. You would just torpedo the whole market for certain artists.
Yeah.
And we all know of individual cases where collectors
Where
have
that's
done
happened.
that, and it has happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think that in terms of Irving's experience, my experience, to the artists we've been involved with, it's really like family.
Yeah.
So we're very sensitive about protecting the body of work, the reputation of these artists, even if we're no longer actually representing them. It's a lifetime commitment.
I want to tell two dealer stories.
A dealer? You know some.
I know some.
Okay.
Two dealers that I was very involved with and learned from. Before I went to LA in 1957, I worked for Knoll Associates. I worked with Mrs. Knoll, who did these big corporate jobs, and she would send me out for paintings. And her brief was always this size, green, this size, red, this size, blue. So I hit on Joseph Albers. Brilliant. I mean, he fit the bill. And I used to walk over to Sydney, and we would chat, and I bought several albums from him. One day we had a meeting. He wanted to talk to me, and I went to see him. And you would walk through rooms of absolutely extraordinary material. Wooden arps, Giacometti, Mondrian, 3 Brancusis. No telling what you encountered in his gallery. And one day I sat talking to him face to face, and I said, I just remembered a phone call that I have to make. Please excuse me, it'll only take a minute. He said, no problem. Down that corridor, turn left, turn right. I went down the corridor, turned left, turned right. There was a payphone on the wall. Reach into my pocket, pull out a dime, and I make my call. But I've never forgotten it. That's one dealer story. The second dealer story has to do with a Leo who I adored and learned a great deal from as well. And I went to see him in 1958 from California. And I said, Leo, all the artists in California very intrigued by Jasper Johns. However, they've never seen a painting. Can we do something? He said, oh, my dear, I have a waiting list of 2 or 3 people. I knew exactly who they were. He said, he supports my gallery. There isn't anybody else I can sell. He pays my rent. However, here's his telephone number. He said, call him. Maybe something will happen. Incredible story. So, indeed, I did call Jasper, and I went to Houston Street. He was in a big bank building at the time. There was a little Schwitters that he traded someone for. I walked by the Schwitters into this enormous room with a big rectangular table, all his sculpture, light bulb, flashlight, ale cans. I said, what are these? Mind you, coming from a first-generation orientation, I had no idea what I was looking at. He explained what he was doing, told me he was making these sculptures. And I said, what about a Schwitters Jasper Johns show in LA? He said, where are you going to get the Schwitters? I said, there's a German expatriate lady who lives in Los Angeles. She's got them. He said, if you can get them, I'll send you my sculpture. And he did. And that's an exhibition we had in 1960. The sculptures were $500 a piece. I sold nothing. Am I proud of it? It's a joke today.
Well, Irving, you still have the light bulb.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
flashlight sculpture.
Flashlight, yeah. Sold the light bulb.
Let
For
me ask-
multi-millions of dollars.
Let me ask you about your sensibility
Yeah.
and how quick or how deliberative it is. A long time ago, my wife, who is a painter, had a studio visit in LA when we still lived in LA with a certain art critic. And when the art critic came into the room, he said, don't be offended if the studio visit is brief because, and he said this absolutely without any irony at all, I can take everything in 30 seconds. Okay, what is your method like? You take a little longer than 30 seconds? Do you cogitate afterward? Do you have doubts? Or do you get it like that?
No, I mean, you get it only insofar as you can get it. And it has to do with you bring, when you confront a new work, everything to bear. I bring 60 years of looking at art to bear on whatever it is I'm looking at. That counts for something. And then, finally, if the work is new, really new, it's your intuition. But your intuition, after X number of years, it becomes very refined, you know. And it either works or it doesn't. If it doesn't work, too bad.
But what about the decision to go with it, like to have when you saw the John sculptures and,
Yeah.
and that, you know, that I
Yeah.
want to do this, or the Warhol soup can paintings.
Well, the John sculptures really had to do with the awe. Everybody in California, I mean everybody in California, you know, sometimes an artist will talk badly about another artist, but you have to read between the lines. It sometimes becomes obscure, but I knew that Jasper Johns was held in great regard by 10 artists that I was intimate with. Wow, that's an enormous vote of confidence. So you have that in the back of your mind. You have these things that you're looking at which resonate in a way that you can't understand. Only later can you understand that the ale cans, that the Savarin coffee can, are bridges into Andy. Bridges into Andy's soup can. Are they important today? Incredibly important. They're bridge sculptures. Are they valuable today? Incredibly. How do you know? How do you know? You're in a vacuum. So you have to rely on something. You rely on your experience, your intuition, your feeling, what you've heard, what you're looking at, like that.
Jeffrey, if you were to bring 60 years of art-looking experience, we'd go to prenatal times, wouldn't we? But you want to say something about a little bit less than that?
Well, okay, so I've been in the field 38 years. And something that is very gratifying, I think many of you will agree with, is that actually, in terms of your ability to perceive and understand new art, you get better over time.
Yeah.
And this has been a tremendous reward, because in many fields, people do burn out. They burn out in their 40s. If
Sure.
maybe you're a stock trader, and you can't handle it, you don't have the speed anymore after age 45. Actually, in terms of being able to go into a studio of a young artist, if you can keep the spirit, the enthusiasm, you're better at age 57, that I am now, than at age 22.
Yeah.
Because the encounter, you are bringing your experience, all your cumulative experience,
Right.
to see this object.
Right. Still no
And-
guarantee,
No.
but it helps.
Yeah, and you mentioned this interesting thing of the art critic saying, well, I'm only, I get it all in 30 seconds. So I can relate to that. I think we can all relate to that, because when you encounter an extraordinary work of art, you actually are getting most of it in 30 seconds. And of course, there's so much more that you can get by looking in a deeper way, by having a dialogue with the artist. But that's one of the great things about a work of art that you don't have in a novel, you don't have in a movie. It's this extraordinary concentration that the artist's whole life experience, their career, is all channeled into that one object. And you can get that intensity in 30 seconds if it's a powerful work of art.
Yeah, and if it's a certain kind of work of art, and one of the things, and I'm a little prejudiced being a painter, but one of the things about a painting, if you look at a de Kooning in a museum, you're actually sort of standing at the distance that he was when he painted it.
Right.
You're at arm's length from it.
Right.
But I'm going to throw a little icicle into the fires of fun, to quote Haywood Hale Brune, about the negative thing. This is back to Rico.
Oh, yeah.
One time Rico came over to the studio, and she'd been to see a young artist whose work she didn't like, and she was talking that English that you talked about. And I said, so Rico, does that mean you didn't like it? Was it bad? And she looked at me and she said, bad, you faint. Which I've always thought that's the bottom line. It will never get any lower than that.
There are depths that can't be plumbed.
There are depths, or as another artist I know once said, I've been to so many galleries today, I have a blister on my pivot foot. You want to say anything about non-enthusiasm or
Non-enthusiasm.
negative
I
judgments,
will
or should we
happily-
stay away from that?
All right, I'm going to tell you what I'm opposed to, really opposed to in the art world, since we're heaping so much praise on it. When I had my gallery in California, there was another dealer by the name of Paul Cantor, who was in Beverly Hills. I was on La Cienega Boulevard. Paul called me up and he said, "What are you doing for lunch?" I said, "I'm free." He said, "Come up to the gallery, we'll grab a bite." And we had a sandwich together, and as we had lunch, he began to talk about early Diebenkorn. It seems that he was showing early Diebenkorn, and I was showing late Diebenkorn in my gallery, and he began talking about Dick's early career, to my astonishment. Absolutely to my astonishment. And finally, at the end of this little dialogue, I said to him, "Paul," I said, "the museums must call you all the time." He said, "They never call me." Dealers are sidelined by museums altogether too often, and it is a monstrous waste. It's off my chest.
Can you elaborate just a bit on sidelined, what that means?
Well, they're not referred to. Simply not referred to.
I mean, they don't go to them for advice, or you don't get credit?
I'm a retired dealer. I've had the experiences that I've had. I get calls from collectors. I advise 3 or 4. You know, I have a life. I eat well. I'm happy. No museums call. Museums don't call. I mean, I have information. I grew up with Ellsworth Kelly. I found Andy. Jasper remains one of my closest friends. Am I referred to in a regular way? I speak from my experience, which is the experience of all the dealers that I know. However, the museums will happily take Sydney's gift, take Leo's gift, take Mr. Coots's gift, take Mr. Pearl's gift, but they're not referred to. It's as if they don't exist as far as museums are concerned. And if there are museum people in the audience, remember that.
Maybe
and I am available at a modest fee. I am available.
Yeah, but
I want to make that known.
But you're being so shy and retiring probably contributes to the isolation.
It's my
right?
personality.
Yeah, they have to do that. Okay. One more little aspect to talk about, which comes back to the early days in LA where there were, a few collectors.
Very few.
The Grinsteins,
Yeah.
David Bright collected abstract expressionism. There were like
Betty
4 or
Asher.
5, Betty Asher.
Betty Asher.
But there were just a few.
Yeah.
One of the things that LA is, though, it is a major world art capital on the scale of anybody, but unlike a lot of places, it does have a dominant, now that's not the right word, not dominant, but a prepossessing entity. And I'm going to ask how this affects that, and that's Eli Broad. I don't think you have an equivalent of Eli Broad, let's say, in New York. He doesn't run everything, but he's very important. You have the Broad Museum of Contemporary Art, the BCAM. He's on the board of MOCA. He's going to do another museum either out west or downtown. Does that skew anything out there?
You're going to force me to take a position, and
No.
I'm going to take it. There was a collector called Robert Rowan in Southern California years and years ago, and he was responsible for the Pasadena Museum, which was an extraordinary entity in Southern California, moving from one place into a brand new kind of extraordinary building which they could not support. And eventually, this building was sold to Norton Simon. And I went to a dinner party, and a lady there, Lucille Smith, said, "Mr. Blum, you're from California." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Can we talk about the Pasadena situation?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Who's the devil and who's the angel?" And I said, "Odd you should ask. I'm one of the few people who can tell you precisely who the devil is and who the angel is. It's the same man. It's Bob Rowan." Now, you talk about Eli. He's both the devil and the angel brought forward. The money is incredibly useful and makes things happen. And he's one of the few people in California at that level of generosity. However, if his interest wanes, what then? You're on the hot seat, Jeffrey.
Well, I think all of you know I'm at MOCA largely because of Eli Broad.
Yes.
That maybe some of the people in the European audience don't realize that the museum had a near-death experience last year. And the museum was in danger of closing. Some people said, well, the solution is sell one of the Rothkos for $80 million, and that's how we'll rescue us. But that's, a very dangerous path. Others said, well, what's the problem? Why don't you just merge with the LA County Museum? But that would be the end of this dream of a great independent contemporary art museum in one of the great art capitals of the world. It was a dilemma. Eli Broad stepped in with a $30 million matching grant.
Extraordinary.
And he saved the museum.
Yeah.
And Eli refers to himself as a venture philanthropist. So, like a venture capitalist. He doesn't just give 30 million and say, enjoy it. He's there to make sure that the money is used well and that the museum doesn't go back to some of its old habits. So I'm very appreciative that Eli rescued this institution, that MOCA exists because of him now.
And all you can do is hope it goes on.
And I think there's a very interesting solution to his collection over the long term that's going to help the museum. He is planning to build his own museum across the street from MOCA, downtown. That will hopefully give
It's going to be
downtown
next to the
LA.
Blum Foundation.
We have a site for you, Irving.
Oh,
I've saved one of the other parking lots for you.
I love parking lots.
And that will create the critical mass.
Okay, we're sort of at the end of this, and I thought, and it was asked that we might, have a few questions from the audience, but I have one last sort of scripted question. So I'm going to, was going to go first, but I decided to put it last. We're here at a giant art fair, probably the most important contemporary art fair in the world, and it's a creature of the art market. And the art market is huge. We see the sales in London and New York and Hong Kong. It makes front page news in not just the art sections of the newspaper, but the front page of the newspapers, insofar as newspapers still exist anymore, and sometimes above the fold. Irving made art history with his life in the art market. Jeffrey comes to the directorship of a major museum from the art market. So my question is, with regard to the contemporary art and the contemporary art market, we have a sort of situation now sometimes where the art market is almost as famous as the art, and that some dealers and entrepreneurs are almost, I guarantee you that the name recognition of, say, Larry Gagosian is as great as any artist probably represented in the fair. Are we at a situation or on the verge of it where the tail is wagging the dog?
Wow. Jeffrey?
Well, I think it's the art world, it's not just the art market, it's a pluralistic situation. And it's an open, democratic platform. And so the people who have the drive, the talent, they're the ones who shape the future of art. And in the past 10, 15 years, there have been a remarkable group of ambitious entrepreneurial art dealers who have opened up the whole situation, helped bring in a new audience. There are also great entrepreneurial museum directors. Look at the example of the Tate, transforming the art world in the UK. So I think it's not one versus the other. It's the art world is a platform for talented, ambitious people
Expensive.
who want to who want to put something, who want to realize their beliefs. And so I decided the museum was the right platform for me right now. And I do feel that things got out of balance a little bit between the museum and critical side and the market side. But this art world reflects the people who are out there, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay. Le dernier mot should go to Mr. Blum. You're the alpha and the omega of this conversation. So.
Well, I completely agree with Jeffrey, as always. I'm on his payroll, and it would be hard not to agree. But I want to talk, before we finish, about probably the most valuable thing I own. In 1962, Ken Price was an artist I showed who went to Japan, and he came into the gallery and he said, "I want to buy you something." And I said, "I've never been to Japan. I don't know what to ask for." And I said, can you come tomorrow? And he said, "Yeah." And he came into the gallery the next day, and I said, "I know exactly what I want, Kenny." And he said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want a diary. I want something that tells me about your adventures while you're over there." He said, he said, "Too complicated." He said, "I can't do that." He went, came back in 2 weeks, came into my gallery, put a wooden box on my gallery. I opened the box. It was a 25-foot long scroll depicting all his adventures, real and imaginary, while in Japan. It is a treasure. I've never shown it. When I die, it goes with me.
In the box?
In the box.
In the box.
The box in the box.
The 38 Dodge, right? That you...
So things come at you in odd ways.
I think there's a little time left. Do you want to have some questions or comments from the audience? Do you have a microphone out there? Does somebody have a microphone?
You've acquitted yourself like a gentleman. I'm proud of you.
Oh, it's on.
I thought I was on your payroll.
Thank you.
What?
I thought I was on your payroll.
Okay, I wanted to make sure no one else was before me. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us this morning. Given the vibrant artist history that you've described that's been developed in LA, outside of the Art Basel December season context, do you feel that there's this similar potential possible in Miami?
I didn't get
Do you
about the
think that
potential
there's a
in Miami?
similar potential, the whole LA thing, is it possible in Miami? Is that a fair summary? Yeah.
Well, I think the art market, I mean, why not? The art market is so broad, there's a potential in Akron. God knows where the next potential is. But is there activity in Miami? Absolutely. Does it compare to nothing, I must say, compares to Basel. However, there's activity. And it's serious. And people go. And sales are made. And I doubt that it'll be the last fair in this country.
You do have one thing in Miami, though, I think that's different from like you probably have a lot more of what they call boutique museums.
Yeah, exactly.
Those individual things, the Marty Margulies and the Rubels, and that may be a character that defines or, you know, determines the way the Miami thing grows.
Yeah.
But to really develop, you need art schools, you need an art magazine,
Yeah,
you
criticism.
need a larger public museum.
Yeah.
So Miami is slowly getting these elements, but you know, it's a long way from Los Angeles with 8 art schools and, you know, so much else in the art infrastructure.
Right. Good luck, Miami.
I just wanted to make a point of
It's
correction.
not working.
Oh, sorry. So I just wanted to make a point of correction. Dennis had his first retrospective in the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam about 10 years ago. So MOCA is not the first.
Didn't really hear that.
I didn't.
Didn't get that.
I missed it. Something was not the first. There was something 10 years ago.
She just said that Dennis had his first retrospective at the Stedelijk Museum
Right.
10 years ago.
Okay.
Right, right.
Thank you. Any others? Well, thank you very much. You've been a very good audience. Appreciate your coming.
We'd like all of you to go back to the fair and spend money.